Hello and welcome to the health program on Trust Television. I am Aisha Salihu. On this week's episode of Healthy Living, we're taking a deep dive into Nigeria's current challenge of alarming heat wave, a period where an abnormal hot weather sets in amidst the dust and haziness of the Harmattan season that we're gradually exiting. But health and climate authorities are urging people to stay hydrated and shelter from the burning sun. Nigerians are experiencing a heat wave causing millions of people to suffer through scorching heat. Experts warn that the extreme temperatures amid the epileptic power supply could trigger diseases, threaten livestock, and lead to death. This is even as the dire consequences of climate change becomes more evident every year, a trend projected to accelerate in the future. I have joining me on the program to elaborate further on the health implications of the heat waves, Dr. Agbo Ebuta, a public health expert, and Mr. Yusuf Rigasa, an environmentalist, to explore the relationship between climate change and the heat waves. Now, gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Now, just before I begin my questions, I'd like to run us through a backgrounder. On February 13th, the Nigerian Meteorological Agency predicted air temperatures to hit 41 degrees Celsius over the north and 39 degrees Celsius over the south, with model projections indicating temperatures to remain high in the coming days. The agency, however, warned of dehydration and heat stroke as the heat stress sets in. Then the 41 degrees Celsius is considered very high and dangerous and can lead to a medical emergency that requires immediate professional attention. Now, Nigerians have, however, been advised to take adequate fluid, seek shade, use fans, and wear light, breathable clothing to reduce exposure to high temperatures and avoid strenuous physical activity during peak heat hours. Now, due to climate change, northern Nigeria is seeing greater heat waves, dust, and haziness, while in some southwestern part of the country, especially in Lagos State, there has been records of lengthier and more erratic rainfall leading to floods. Now, I'd like to come back to you, Mr. Yusuf. This is where you come in. How do you say marry both climate change and heat waves? What is the exact relationship and what are the consequences? Why are we having these kind of consequences?
Yeah, I think I need to draw your attention to the global engagement, this conference of parties that has recently taken place in Dubai, where Nigeria, among other countries, have made certain commitments. So this impact of climate change are not unexpected. The problem is that Nigeria, having drafted its own national climate change adaptation plan, ought to have put up some of these mitigations and adaptations to enable citizens and communities to make the necessary adjustments for this rainfall and, as you mentioned, the heat wave. But the problem is that most of our citizens and communities are not aware of the mitigations or safeguards that they need to put in place in order to avoid the adverse impact of some of these climate change effects. And likewise, communities, especially at the local government level, they tend to ignore some of these warnings that are coming from national agencies such as NIMET, and of course the warnings that are coming from a health organization. But it is very important that where these informations are available, that they should be disseminated to citizens and communities, and above all, government should make financial, technical, and human resource capacity available to vulnerable citizens and communities to ensure that they adjust and adapt the way they are supposed to, so as to avoid, the flash flood, as the case in Lagos, and of course to mitigate the impact of heat wave on the health of our citizens. These challenges cannot be ignored because we tend to know some of this warning, and at the end of the day, the consequences become dire on our citizens, communities, and the country at large. So we need to pay attention, disseminate the information, and provide resources in order to activate all the safeguards and mitigations.
I'm starting this line of questioning with you because you are obviously an environmentalist, and I'd like to know, now we have new problems such as extreme droughts, flood, deforestation, pollution, and food shortages have resulted as a result of this. And you earlier stated there has been advisory out there, but then Nigerians are not heeding to it. But now that we have these challenges now, what would you advise as an expert in your own right, just so we're able to mitigate some of these challenges that we now have to deal with?
Now, when you look at heat wave, one of the safeguards is that you keep yourself hydrated. This is an action that a citizen on his own can actually take. You don't need the government to give you water. You don't need the government to tell you when and how you should take water. But when you float, in a city like Lagos, one citizen or one community cannot be able to implement such safeguard. You need the resources and the technical and financial capacities of the government to be able to put the necessary safeguard that will mitigate or help the communities in Lagos to adapt to the problems of flash floods. So there are certain things, adjustment that can be made at citizens level. Citizens should be aware of their responsibilities to that. And there are certain safeguards that has to be put in by local government. Local governments must be aware of these responsibilities. There are certain responsibilities that are strictly for state and federal government. The government must be aware of these responsibilities and make provisions for them on time, because you don't have to wait until things are happening before you start mobilizing or activating your safeguard. No, safeguards are designed to be there, before the emergency happens. That is the way we should be approaching them, and I believe that is the way forward.
And I talked about drought and also how it's affecting livestock. We have cases of animals that we are losing as a result of the hotness of the weather, as a result of more like water drying out from our lands. How do we? I just want to address the environmental impact, the environmental challenge and aftermath of all of this on lives, both humans and animals, and also even the environment itself, because we interact with the environment.
Yeah, you see, there is a program under the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. It is called Climate Change Adaptation Support Program, CAPS. And this program is designed to help communities in the frontline states, in the northern borders of Nigeria, starting from Borno all across to Kebbi State. Now, this program is designed, to provide, seeds, smart seeds that can actually be sown, grown and mature within 2-3 months. These are climate smart seeds, and we have the same thing with livestock. And there's an investment in terms of building art dams, rehabilitating old ones, as well as, afforestation programs, things like that are captured under the National Climate Change Adaptation Plan. So the Ministry of Agriculture has been supporting these activities, and it is hoped that, when the necessary investment and support are provided, our citizens and communities should make adjustment to climate impact in their homes and within their communities.
Now, at this juncture, I'd like for us to bring Dr. Agbo into the conversation. Now, Doctor, we're battling heat wave in the country, and a lot of people are coming down with a number of diseases. I'd like to hear from you professionally and as an expert. What kind of diseases are we expected to see in this particular period? I mean, just so we don't mistake some for others. And then how do we go about mitigating and attending to these kind of diseases and health concerns?
Well, indeed, as clearly pointed out, temperatures are high as 40, 41, 39 in different parts of Nigeria. Even in the FCT now, we have very high temperatures. So what happens is that when the environmental temperature is high, your body tries to regulate your internal temperature. Now, the internal temperature of the body has to be within a range for your body to function sufficiently, for the enzymatic processes, for the normal processes, we call them physiological processes. So for all the processes that make up a human being to function. these cells and your systems have to be at the normal temperature. Now, the normal temperature we accept in this environment is between 35.5 all the way up to 37.2. Now, that is physiological temperature.
Right.
When the temperature outside the body is high, what happens is that, when the environmental temperature is high, what happens is that your body's mechanism for heat loss, which is through sweating and a couple of other mechanisms, is to a large extent suppressed. And that means that you can retain heat and the temperature goes up. Apart from that, you also absorb heat from the environment, and high temperature is not healthy.
Okay.
So your body tries to regulate temperature by several mechanisms like sweating. Sweating is critical. As you lose fluid through sweating, you try to get back fluid by drinking water. So what happens again is that it gets to a point where your body mechanisms begin to fail. And all of these will give us a spectrum of heat-related illnesses. At one end of the spectrum, where it is mild to moderate, is called heat exhaustion. And at the other end is what you call heat stroke. So what differentiates it is the severity and the impact on the patient. So for you to identify a patient who has heat exhaustion, you will notice that obviously this patient is in an environment where temperatures are high, and this patient will be sweating profusely. The body's physiology will be struggling to regulate the internal heat, the internal temperature through sweating. So these patients sweat profusely. You will see that these kind of patients are very dehydrated, and they will make serious attempts to drink water. They will also notice other symptoms of dehydration like headache, extreme weakness and tiredness. Some of them may even have nausea and vomiting and may feel lightheaded. At this stage, a patient should get some form of intervention. The basic intervention is to get these people out of the hot environment and to provide them with supportive care. It starts with giving them water, taking off their clothes, and cooling them down gradually. Most times these patients are, well, not all, most times, all the time, patients with heat exhaustion are conscious and they can cooperate with you, so you can give them directives on what to do. You can also offer this care even telemedically. But if a patient with heat exhaustion, all the symptoms I've mentioned, is not removed from that hot environment and is sweating profusely, it gets to a point where you would notice that the person is so dehydrated that he's not even sweating at all, because you are basically dry. At this stage, the temperature of the body begins to heat up because you are unable to lose heat through sweating, which is a major method. By the time your body temperature gets to 39.4 and above and is persistent at that level, your cells in the body, which are supposed to be functional within a narrow gauge of temperature, like we mentioned earlier, the physiologically accepted temperature, will begin to malfunction. This cellular function can occur because, every part of your body, there are cells. It's the same micro abnormality going on. So if it's a malfunction in the brain, patients may get confused, disoriented, and may even, to surprise you, may even end up with stroke. These patients may also have heart problems when the cells in the hearts are also affected. So a patient can end up with a cardiac arrest because of abnormal transmission of electric activities. In the liver, it can cause liver failure, liver inflammation. And again, in the kidney, it can cause all forms of kidney abnormalities, including kidney failure, because to a large extent, the cells are malfunctioning. And apart from that, because the patient had profusely been perspiring and sweating, these patients' blood pressures will drop because they've lost a lot of fluid. This drop in blood pressure has implication for the kidney. It will worsen the scenario in the kidney. So patients who progress from heat exhaustion, from just tiredness, weakness, can progress to rapidly, in some environments, to stroke, heart attacks, kidney failures, liver failures, and multi-organ dysfunction. So for those kind of patients, it's important that you intervene quickly because they can die. The death can occur rapidly. You must get them out of that environment where they are hot, and because their conscious state is usually altered, you do not give them water. If you give these patients who are semi-unconscious or unconscious water to drink, they will aspirate. It will go through the wrong pipe. So, at the back of your mouth, you have a pipe at the back that takes food to the stomach and a pipe in the front that takes air into the lungs. That pipe is called the trachea, is the windpipe. So if you try to give them water in trying to help them, when they are unconscious, they are going to aspirate and die. We've seen a lot of cases like that. So what do? You have to take them to a place where you cool their temperature down by taking off their clothes and using water, spray of water, and where possible you can soak them in a bath where you have the ability to supervise that to prevent them from drowning. And obviously, since there are other issues that may come up like kidney problem, liver problem, there's a lot of supportive care. So after the first aid, which can happen outside the hospital, you must get patients with heat stroke quickly to the hospital. When we had heat strokes in certain parts of Europe and the rest, you saw that the government had to construct water sprinklers points where people could go and just get a shower out in the open, because we do know that a lot of people are dying, and the population that is mostly at risk are young children, infants, children under 5, elderly people, and then people with chronic health conditions. In fact, even patients with sickle cell anemia, sickle cell disease, abnormalities of the blood called hemoglobinopathies, may have a higher incidence of crisis, illness, because they are susceptible to dehydration, and here you are in an environmental situation where you are losing a lot of heat. So it can cause a lot of problem. But for heat exhaustion, first aid, cool the person down, give the person some water, and get a medical attention if necessary. But for heat stroke, you must involve your physician, but you can obviously offer first aid care.
Okay, right. I'm hearing a number of complications here, as you've rightly stated, and I must admit they're very scary. But then just before we go, you have stated the risk factors, what to do and what not to do. I'd like to hear, just before we get to these complicated parts, what do we do as a form of, say, preventive measures? I know earlier I stated about protective clothing and staying away from the sun, but then it is not really possible for one to ultimately and in its entirety stay away from the sun if you must move from one place to another. And even whilst you're not in the sun you are in your house. The house is very hot and all that. So I'd like to hear from you as a medical expert. How do we prevent, say, heat exhaustion and heat strokes, just before we get to the dire situations of complications, as you have stated earlier?
Well, you've said a lot, and the key thing is to avoid it as much as possible. But when you cannot avoid it, you must drink water. And you must drink at least 3 to 5 liters of water. And you drink even when you are not thirsty, because some people may not feel as much thirst as other people, even at the same level of dehydration. So you just keep drinking water and try to get in as much as 3 to 4 liters. You could make your water drinking interesting, like taking a fruit juice and all of that, watermelon and whatever you have available. If you feel not encouraged or motivated to drink free water, that's one. Obviously, you have to wear light colored clothing. These are better. You don't wear thick clothing. This allows you to sweat more easily. The type of clothing should also have multiple pores. They're not very tiny pores that will allow the evaporated sweat to pass out. And obviously, you also would need to use, there's the option of using sunscreens, sun protection with a protection factor of at least 15. That helps to a large extent. It avoids you getting sunburn and reduces the amount of evaporation you need to cool down. Apart from that, you could also use coverings like hats or caps that covers your head and also helps you with temperature regulation. But also very important, if you are out in the sun for long, if you can avoid being out in the sun between 12 noon and 3 p.m. where we expect the peaks of temperature with exposure to sun, that would be a brilliant thing to do. And definitely, if you feel unwell, you should seek some form of intervention or the other.
Just so we're not at the risk of losing Mr. Yusuf, I'd like to come back to you now, Mr. Yusuf Rigasa. We have seen this rise in temperatures in parts of the country, especially in the north. And now, just like I stated earlier, the north is seeing greater heat waves. However, we still have, in some parts of the north, we still have dust and haziness. You know, it's as if we're not really sure if we're completely out of the Harmattan season or we're experiencing heat. I'd like for you to, you know, put us in the right direction. How do you explain this? How is it possible that somehow, in some places, still in the same state, they are still experiencing cold, haziness, dust? I mean, the obvious things they show us that we're still in the Harmattan season. However, we still have extreme temperatures.
Yeah, you see, that is the beauty of having an early warning system in place with organizations such as NIMET. They always give out, you know, weather and climate projections, sometimes for 7 days, you know, so as to conscientize citizens and communities that they need to put the necessary safeguards before this emergency occur. But however, the environmental dynamics that you are mentioning are some of the features of climate change. Although you have an early warning system that is telling you these are the likely, you know, weather and climate situations that are going to happen, you know, but due to, you know, uncertainty that is involved in some of these environmental variables, sometimes you may have flash events. That is why you have flash floods. You have some bouts of, you know, heat waves. You have some maybe delayed rainfall. You know, short-term droughts. Some of these environmental effects. That is when they actually happen. So the uncertainty in environmental dynamics is one of the important features of climate change. We need to pay attention and invest more in some of the early warning system given by organizations such as NIMET and NEHISA. And whenever they give such early warning systems, we need to put the safeguards and mitigation in place. I believe that is the only way we can be able to save the situation. Climate change sometimes is not something that you can predict with high degree of certainty. The uncertainty is part of the realities of climate change impact, and we have to live by that.
Now, let's say, according to global best practices, you have stated earlier the role of the Ministry of Agriculture and how they have come up with, is there a climate change mechanism, how Nigerians can cope with it. But then, do you think the contents of all of that and how it has been practiced today in Nigeria, do you think somehow, however, can help to mitigate? Because you did state earlier that climate change is not something that one can predict. It's just for one to follow the advisory and also follow measures that can somehow help to cope with it. But then, do you think with what the Ministry of Agriculture or say even Ministry of Environment, what they're doing, do you think somehow it matches with global best practices? And do you think it will, in one way or another, help to address the issues, you know, the environmental issues we're now having to deal with, even pollution? We also have the issues of air pollution.
Yeah, I think the global best practice is to have all the stakeholders coming together and working in synergy. What you see in Nigeria, what happened in Dubai, we sent more than 500 delegates. Most of these delegates are doing their own thing. There is no synergy between government and private sector, between even government different levels. They are not actually working together, and there's a disconnect with communities, and even within communities, there is a disconnect between, the local governments, communities and citizens. Even among the civil societies, most of them are still working inside. So we need to, bring all these national assets and resources together, and follow the National Climate Change Adaptation Plan. It's a well-thought document, and it spells out, roles and responsibilities, for everybody. That is the only way that we as a nation can be able to sort ourselves and rid ourselves with the negative impact of climate change on our society and our economy.
Now, Mr. Yusuf, just finally, before I let you go, I know you will agree with me that every living thing, both humans and animals or plants, we evolve and exist in an ecosystem. Now, I'd like to hear from you. How do people who practice agriculture, how do they sustain production? How do they sustain, because we're now battling with food shortages, there's a lot of food insecurity in the country. How do they sustain production, both animal and food production, in line with the climate change consequences and also the heat wave that we're now battling with, that we know for sure that may affect some crops and also animals?
Yeah, you see, what we call sustainable balance is always, it relies on what you call ecological equilibrium. Within the ecosystem, there is a balance between water, air, soil, and the nutrients, among other inputs. So what climate change tends to do is to distort this ecological equilibrium in such a way that, it will impact human beings negatively, it will impact biodiversity or wildlife negatively, it will equally impact the soil negatively. Don't forget, the largest amount of life or living things are actually embedded in the soil. And then as the soil becomes dry, most of these living things tend to die off or they become dormant. So part of the program of the Ministry of Agri and Rural Development, which is also replicated by the Ministry of Environment, among other institutions, is that what they do is to try to maintain this ecological balance in such a way that as the climate or weather changes, the community and the environmental assets are equally able to adapt and adjust to some of these changes. It's just like flash flood, for example. Whenever a small area is receiving 10 times its amount of normal rainfall, what you need to build in that place is an effective and a functional, drainage system, such that when the rain falls, at least the soil or the environment is able to rid itself of that amount of water. But where you refuse to build and reinforce the natural drainage systems, the water tends to build and you have flood. And whenever you have flood, it has extreme impact, not only on human beings, because that is where we focus mostly. The impact also impact, the livestock, wildlife, the soil itself, plants, animals, and vegetation.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming on the program. This is the much we can take at this time. We do hope to reconnect with you in subsequent episodes of the program. And that concludes this week's episode of the program, Healthy Living on Trust Television. For comments, contributions, and suggestions, do well to follow and subscribe to all Trust TV social media handles. Download the Trust TV app on iOS and Android devices across their respective stores and get live updates on the YouTube live stream and the website. Join us next time as we continue to explore subjects crucial to your health and well-being. I'm Aisha Salihu. Thank you so much for your time.